much fun it was when Prohibition ended. And so, gee, it's been a long time now, hasn't it? 1922, Prohibition began nationwide, but it started here in Dade County in 1913, so we were ahead of the game. But the rule was here, I think the hypocrites know, that there was always a little room for some real drinking around here. I mean, you know, with the tourists and whatever. So without giving away the store, let me introduce Eliot once again.
Hello, everybody. First of all, I did not break my arm in a bar fight in a speakeasy. I was doing a talk at Books and Books on March 1st, and afterwards, we were ready to go to dinner, started coughing, got a little lightheaded, turned the wrong way, down I went. Broke my wrist in 3 places. So, the good part is I'm a lefty. The bad part is I forgot my clicker, so Andres here is going to be kind enough to do this, do like this. Also, where I live in the Boca Raton area, we are full of people from somewhere else. No secret. They will be there for 30, 40 years, but they are still a New Yorker, still a Chicagoan, still a Philadelphian. So if they can do it, so can I. I've been in the Boca area since 1987. In fact, I'm a Dade guy. I go back far enough. You know my dad, Howard Kleinberg. Between the two of us, somebody named Kleinberg was in the newspaper business in South Florida continually for 72 years. And that might never get topped, especially now with the horrible, horrible state of our news business and the tremendous, tremendous problem that our country has right now with lack of local news. Wherever you are, whether it's down here or anywhere in this country, please support your local newspaper, because the hardest thing to explain to people is that that is their only source of local news. Oh, no, I get my news on the internet. Okay. If the Dade County Commission did something last night, and you're reading it on the internet, it was a Miami Herald reporter. Or it was somebody talking over their back fence. Your choice. And there are millions of places around America where there is no local paper. So whatever your local government is doing with your tax money, you don't know. So please continue to support your local newspaper. The networks are not going out of business, but Fox News and CNN are not covering Pinecrest. So that's the end of that rant. Also, I'm proud to be in a library. I've been in libraries all over, literally all over the world. Please support your local library. I'm not just saying this because I'm trapped here. Please support your local library. They are holy ground. And if I had a nickel for every time I wrote a historian asking for some really obscure piece of information for a book I was working on, and they turned around in 24 hours, just your eyes want to bug out. They're amazing people. But they need our support. We need a country full of libraries. So, end of that rant. Let's talk about Prohibition. I should tell you that in 3 years at Miami Palmetto High and 4 years at the University of Florida, both places where drinking might have happened, I wasn't a boozer. And a lot of people in this country weren't boozers, but a lot of people were. So, my new book, Hypocrite's Row, is about a Miami police detective I created who's trying to fight the bad guys during Prohibition. I will argue that there was no wilder time. Now, this is a pretty bold statement, because you guys know the history. I will argue that there was no wilder time in South Florida than the 20s. Yeah, we had the cocaine cowboys, and we had the shootouts, and we had all of, Scarface. But here's the difference. Not everybody down here in the 80s did drugs. In fact, most people, when you think about it, most people didn't do drugs, especially the really hard stuff. And those who did do drugs had no illusions about the people from whom they were buying the drugs. They knew they were not buying the drugs from Boy Scout leaders. Well, sometimes they were, but not a good thing. Everybody knew that the guys selling the drugs were bad dudes. And most of the people were afraid of the people that they bought the drugs from, right? That's not how it was in the 20s. A lot of people drank. In fact, as many people drank in the 20s as drink now. Until one day, they couldn't drink. And except here in South Florida, they could. Because the enforcement of Prohibition was a joke, which I'll explain to you. But also, the people who were supplying liquor. Now remember, nobody ever had their rights to drugs taken away from them, right? For as long as people knew drugs were illegal. But one day liquor was illegal, and then it was legal, and the next day it wasn't. And so all that did down here in South Florida was turn it over to the bad guys. And so the law enforcement people had the unenviable task of enforcing an unpopular rule in which they had become the villains, and the rumrunners and moonshiners were the good guys. The world was turned upside down. So, let's introduce you to Nate Moran, and here's what he had to say. Unlike parts of the country, you think about New York City, how did they get their liquor from, say, Canada? Well, somebody had to cart it over from Quebec, right? And there were only so many carts. There were so many, in the 1920s, how many roads were there through the pasture lands of northern New York State? And there was cops at every one of them. We got a big ocean. Get there in a few hours. And by the way, what do you think the Everglades looked like in the 1920s? Plenty of places to build a still? You better believe it. And all these places in Miami and Miami Beach that had a big oak door. Come on in. That's why they're called speakeasies. Excuse me. Here's the code. And they all had these secret rooms where tourists could pay whatever it takes to have a snort. So everybody kept drinking, but instead of the government making money, the crooks made money. And the cops had to spend money chasing the crooks. In Palm Beach, at the old Royal Poinciana Hotel, the first hotel Henry Flagler built before he came down here and built the Royal Palm, the Royal Poinciana had a secret room. You had to go through the men's room to get to it, and you could go there and you could drink with impunity. And the name of the room was Hypocrite's Row. The first time I heard this phrase, I knew that was the name of the book. Prohibition did not just start in South Florida with Prohibition. It goes back a lot further. Go ahead. Up in West Palm, Banyan Street, it was called Whiskey Street. Everybody who was building, remember, I had to learn all this when I moved up to Palm Beach County. I thought the world began in Dade, with the founding of Dade County. Of course, Palm Beach County predates it, or at least Flagler and his gang were already building up in Palm Beach County before they were really building here. And they were building all these hotels on the island on Palm Beach. They all lived, of course, the workers all lived on the West Palm side, duh. And there was one street, if you're familiar with downtown West Palm, Flagler named all the streets for flowers in alphabetical order. Banyan, Clematis, Datura, Ivernia, Fern, Gardenia, Hibiscus, all the way up. And the street here it started with Banyan Street. It didn't start with an A. Banyan Street was the only street in the 1890s where whiskey was allowed. What could go wrong? The locals called it Whiskey Street. So they had saloons, and what else did they have? They had places where you could gamble, and what else did they have? Of course, brothels. So all the laborers that were building the resorts, they all came down to Banyan Street. In 1904, local women invited Kansas Cyclone Carrie Nation, hatchet and all. Finally, in 1925, they got tired of naming it they renamed it to First Street, and so the locals just said, oh, we're going to call it Thirst Street. And it wasn't until 1989 they finally renamed it Banyan Boulevard. It's First Street forever. So now we come down to Dade County. As Bob mentioned, 1913, a decade before Prohibition, Dade County votes dry. October of 1913 takes effect in 1914. Was Broward founded because of booze? Well, wait a minute. Between 1895 and 1935, South Florida had many dry votes, all of which failed, some very closely, But in 1913, Fort Lauderdale attempted to split, and Dade said no, wanted to become their own county, but in October they had the vote. Fort Lauderdale wanted prohibition. Miami's like, no, we want our tourists to be able to drink. So they voted. It was a very close vote. Miami voted to stay wet, but the ban passed. It soured the Miami area, helped lead to the creation of Broward in 1915. Next. Anybody know who this is? Sidney Katz. Go ahead. He was the only successful independent candidate for governor in Florida history. He ran on two platforms, the Pope and the Bottle. Both very popular platforms to run on in 1916 because, and tell me if this sounds familiar, he told farmers, poor whites, manual laborers, blame everything on the Pope and the Bottle, not on anything else. And it worked, he got elected. Go ahead. So, somebody asked me the other day, how on earth did Prohibition happen if everybody loved their liquor? Well, there were groups like this, the Anti-Saloon League, the Women's Temperance Union. Interestingly, they argued that alcohol caused poverty, crime, and domestic problems. Now, an interesting thing, anybody ever wonder where the term teetotaler came from? A teetotaler was somebody who said, I am for total temperance. Teetotaler. They pressured politicians to support candidates who would support being dry. And of course, religious moralizing, God doesn't want you drinking. And when the anti-immigration, isn't that funny how that keeps popping up? Yeah, the problem is alcohol and immigrants. Immigrants and alcohol. Immigrants are drinking alcohol and doing horrible things. 1913 income tax. All of a sudden, America has an income tax, and so they're not as dependent on that alcohol tax, which they really loved. Next. In World War I, they had a temporary prohibition because they needed conserved grain for food during the war instead of beer. In 1916, 23 states already had passed prohibition laws, so it was off and running. 18th Amendment, 3/4 of the state in just 11 months. That's how it happened. How much did people drink at the time? I thought that people drank a lot more back then, but it turned out I was wrong. Go ahead. On the eve of Prohibition, each American teen and adult drank 2 gallons of alcohol a year. About 2.3 gallons now, about the same. 9 drinks a week. Not for me. Next. January 20, Prohibition commences in Miami. This is what I love about this headline. On the left, Prohibition is in place. No alcohol allowed. Here's an ad. Go ahead. Who needs alcohol? Drink our cold syrup. Next. All right. This is why Prohibition failed in Florida. Failed miserably. Failed spectacularly. The rumrunners didn't break a sweat. Does anybody know what that red dot is? Freeport. How close is it to the coast of Florida?
61 miles.
About 2-hour drive, even in the 20s. A decent boat could do it in a couple of hours. Now, I marked some places on this map. Go ahead. That's Palm Beach. If you look at a map of Florida, it's at a bit of an angle, and it actually juts out. Palm Beach is the easternmost point of the state of Florida. So that would have been the closest to Freeport. Well, there was certainly enough of a market in Palm Beach. All those hotels were full of very wealthy people. They all wanted to drink. And it was a straight shot. So a lot of booze went down there. But where was the Golden Goose? The Golden Goose was down here. That's where the big money was. So they might go a little further and go down to Fort Lauderdale, or all the way down to Miami, or they might go to this place. Does anybody know what that place is?
Baker's Hollow.
Bingo. In 1925, Baker's Hollow became Hollow Inlet. You guys probably know this. That's the northern, don't click it. Go next. Okay. That's the northern end of Biscayne Bay. And until 1925, it was closed. And if you had a small boat and you wanted to get into Biscayne Bay without going all the way around, you paid a guy to what? Haul your boat over. Well, in 1925, they cut the inlet. Now, whether it was, somebody asked me, well, did they do it specifically because of Prohibition? I don't think they're that stupid, because it benefited the Prohibition guys to no end. How did it benefit them? Well, once you get to Baker's Hollow and you're in the northern end of Biscayne Bay, let's see, you could go anywhere, right? You could go to North Miami, you could go to Miami Beach, you could go to Coral, once you're in that bay, you go anywhere you want. Next. Good. Casey Piquet, speaking next week. I did an interview with him. He said, but people could buy booze at 5 feet out of the rumble seats in their car. Everybody remember the rumble seat? People would get off the cruise ship in Miami and they'd get out on the street. Anybody got any booze? Over here. Next. My old friend Paul George, the great historian. What a line. We were the leakiest place in the country. Next. Okay, let's talk about the speakeasies. Here's what Nate had to say. Probably once a week, cops in South Florida raided a speakeasy. Mostly they were a waste of time. They got a tip, we're on our way, and they have time to hide the hooch. Anyone prominent gets hustled out the back. Any customer stupid enough to get caught gets a fine. The liquor goes down the drain. Operators get a fine or a short stint in the pokey. Cost of doing business. Next. Sometimes the cops went to the dark side. Aren't you shocked by this? Sheriff Paul Bryan. He was the second sheriff in the history of Broward County. Go ahead. Second sheriff since the county formed. Go ahead. In 1926, for 3 months, 2 Prohibition agents posed as bootleggers, bribed the sheriff up to $15 a week for protection. That's a lot of money in the 20s, right? So they did a raid in January 27, and they arrested 41 people, including the sheriff and all 6 of his deputies. They arrested the entire Broward County Sheriff's Office. But they weren't done. They arrested the police chief and 8 of his patrolmen. I don't know who was left to enforce law in Broward County. Of course, they weren't enforcing the law, so what the heck? Seized 8 stills, 10,000 gallons. You guys know what mash is, right? That's the stuff that they made the moonshine with. It was kind of the mush that they used to make the moonshine. 300 gallons of moonshine, bottles of beer. There you go. In Palm Beach County, a lot bigger than Broward, right? A lot bigger. In 1922, they had to report 46 stills. They go out west, right? 95 gallons of moonshine, 232 gallons of other stuff, 232 barrels of mash. But there they were. Boom, boom, keep going. They were everywhere. These are the ones they knew about. So what do you think? For every one that they caught, there were maybe 5 that they didn't? But anybody know who this is? No. This guy is probably the most famous gangster in the history of Florida. I know that's saying a lot. His name's John Ashley. Go ahead. Today he might just be another thug, but during a time when they were the good guys, he was the good guy. In 1915 bank robbery, he lost his left eye, got the eye patch. 2 months later at the Miami jail, his brother tried to break him out. Shot the jailkeeper. Back then they had a civilian jailkeeper. Bob panicked and he ran out without John. A Miami police officer, John Riblet, raced after him, stepped on the running board. They both shot at each other. Both were killed. Riblet, first officer killed in the line of duty, city of Miami, killed by the Ashley gang. Here's the Ashley gang. They were most famous in Palm Beach County, but they did their business all the way up and all the way down. Go ahead. In 1918, he escaped state prison. For 3 years, they operated stills in northern Palm Beach County and ran rum from the Bahamas. 2 of his brothers vanished during a run from the Bahamas, never seen again. Ashley later captured, escapes again. Finally, go ahead. John and the gang robbed a Pompano Beach bank and he left a bullet at the teller's window. You got to give this guy points for moxie. He said, "This is for the sheriff." Bob Baker, go ahead. Bob Baker was the sheriff of Palm Beach County, which included Martin County until 1925. Anybody familiar with Martin County? Anybody wonder why it's called Martin County? It was part of Palm Beach County, and a bunch of businessmen up in Stewart got tired of being part of this gigantic county, and they went to the legislature to get this county split off. Go back into the 20s, dozens of counties were formed. They were forming them, and mostly what they're doing, they were splitting off from other people, from other counties. So these folks in Stewart wanted to start their own county, and the legislature was stalling. So they went to the governor. They said, "Governor, we are getting tired of this. If you will finally push this through, We will name the county after you, Governor Martin. Here's Bob Baker. Help bring in the... Ashley would send him bullets. He wrote Bob Baker on the bullet. Bob Baker said, go ahead, one day I'm going to have your glass eye on my watch fob. This was a feud, man. These are the kind of feuds people like me love to write about. But Ashley, February of 24, big raid at his still way out in the woods. Killed was one deputy and Ashley's father. Now it's a real blood feud. 1924, one of his guys in his gang robbed a bank. Go back. Robbed a bank. What's he wearing? When they asked the teller, what did the bank robber look like? She said, I don't know. All I saw was the dress. Pretty smart, huh? Next. Bonnie and Clyde. They made the movie about Bonnie and Clyde. They should have made it about John and Laura. Laura was Laura Up the Grove. And she was his moll. Wonderful word, M-O-L-L. It's what they call the gangster's girl. And she actually came from a long time family who actually had a settlement, a little neighborhood up in the northeast corner of Lake Okeechobee, almost into the town of Okeechobee. And if you drive up Highway 98 along Lake Okeechobee, I hope you give yourself plenty of time, you will see a sign for Up the Grove Beach, and that's her family. Two of her brothers later became very well-respected county officials. One was a Palm Beach County tax collector, one was the director of elections. They didn't talk about their sister. She was John's girl. And one day, the cops got a tip. They got a tip, and this was like right after the raid too. They got a tip that Ashley and some of his gang members were going to leave South Florida, go up to Georgia or Tennessee or someplace like that and lay low until the heat died down. Of course, that's a lot harder to do with today's technology, but in the 20s, you could hang out there and then hope that things settled down. Well, somebody dropped a dime. This is a wonderful old phrase that young people have no idea what it means. Somebody called the cops. There is some speculation, and I couldn't put it in the paper if I was reporting in the 1920s because it's just speculation, but historians are allowed a little leeway about something that happened 100 years ago. There is speculation that the person who dropped the dime on John Ashley was Laura, because she was miffed that he wasn't going to take her up to Tennessee to lay low until the heat died down. So the cops get a tip, and way up at the spot where, if you go up there now, it's where US 1 crosses from Indian River to Brevard County, near the town of Sebastian, at the St. Sebastian River. A good friend of mine lives 2 blocks away, so I always go up there to see the bridge when I go to see him, Keith Nelson. So that's what the bridge looked like in 1924, the day after Halloween. The cops didn't know for a fact that the Ashley gang was coming up, but they had a pretty good idea. So they ran a rope across the bridge with a red lantern. A few minutes later, car pulls up, inside are Ashley and 3 of his cronies. And they ordered them out of the car, they cuffed them, and they laid them face down on the road, and then all 4 of the Ashley gang were shot escaping.
Wiggling away.
Good. People said they saw them standing cuffed. One said they got cuff marks on their wrists. Cops insisted they pulled guns. The judge agreed. So that was that. Ada Coates Williams. She's gone now. She was a professor of history at the community college up in St. Lucie County, Fort Pierce. And she was one of those local historians who knew everybody who knew everything. Her family went back as well. And she got friendly with a guy who finally confessed to her one day. He said, I'm going to tell you something under 2 conditions. One is you never name me, and the other is that you don't tell my story until after I was gone. And she said, okay. And he says, Ada, I was on the bridge. I was one of the deputies. Those guys were executed. Nobody really was surprised by this, but he got it on the record. Now, not a whole lot of people wept for the Ashley gang, except, of course, their clients and their mom. They're buried in a neighborhood in Hobe Sound, which, if you drive up through Palm Beach County past Jupiter, you drive into Martin County, where the Jonathan Dixon State Park is, one of the first developments on your right is Nate Moran Sands. It's now a gated community, so you cannot get in there to see these graves, but they're still there. So the Ashley gang was, of course, heroes to some, right? So some people were sorry to see them get executed. And again, in this case, the cops had, in an effort to get rid of some really bad people, they crossed the line. And that's where it gets a little muddy, doesn't it? Good. This guy, his name is James Horace Alderman. His nickname is Gulf Street Pocket. James Horace Alderman was running rum from Freeport to Fort Lauderdale. The British authorities, remember the Bahamas were still a British colony, the British authorities in the Bahamas were more than happy to sell liquor from their docks to people who just happened to be coming from somewhere out west, across the ocean, to buy liquor. The Brits knew exactly who these people were. For them to buy the liquor on the dock was perfectly legal. Since the Brits knew who they were, they made sure to charge them a premium. But it was worth it to the rum runners because, like I said, they could be back in Fort Lauderdale or Palm Beach or Miami in a few hours. And what they would do is they would pack the rum in straw and then inside burlap bags. And these were called, anybody know? Hams. That's what they called them. So, the Secret Service office down here in South Florida got a call from the British authorities. It seemed that some of the rum runners were buying the rum on the docks of Freeport with counterfeit money. And the Brits wanted them to do something about it. Let me get this straight. British authorities were selling stuff they knew was going to be used illegally in the United States to gangsters, and they were mad when the gangsters were using counterfeit money. Didn't matter. Secret Service had an obligation, so they loaded up a boat at the Coast Guard station in Fort Lauderdale. It's on A1A, just south of Los Olas now. And 2 Secret Service agents, 4 Coast Guardsmen headed east towards Freeport. About halfway there, they came across a guy coming in the other direction. Who's this guy? James Horace Alderman. The Coast Guard skipper said, has any of you heard this story? Oh, great. The Coast Guardsman said, we're going to board your boat. He said, no, you're not. He said, Coast Guard has the authority to board any boat on the high seas if they have reason to believe someone's life is in danger or a crime is being committed. So they boarded Alderman's boat. They found about 8 hams, hundreds of dollars worth of liquor. And at some point, the Alderman got the drop on the skipper, and he pulled out a gun and started shooting. And all shooting. And then the shooting was done. The Coast Guard skipper was dead. 1 Coast Guardsman was dead. 1 Coast Guardsman was paralyzed. Secret Service agent was dead. Alderman had somehow been badly beaten along with his cohort. But Alderman still had the drop. And he said, guys, I am going to burn your boat down to the water line and all you guys in it. And I'm going to go on my way. And he turned to his crony to start the engine, and the engine flooded. See, people think, as historians, they always worry about somebody saying, oh, you're making that up. The engine flooded. They couldn't get the boat going. Alderman says, well, this is a predicament. He says, well, we're just going to have to move all the hams onto the Coast Guard boat, burn our boat, and take the Coast Guard boat and pull it into the mangroves somewhere and go off on our way. While they were doing that, that's when the shootout got going, and that's when Alderman and his crony were captured. Alderman was, you can imagine the newspapers had a field day at the time. Newspapers love to do these big, full-page cartoon things. Alderman is brought into the United States, back to Fort Lauderdale, and he's put on trial in federal court in Miami. I was in Atlanta for a wedding and had an opportunity to get into the National Archives regional office in Atlanta and read the entire file of his trial. It was really cool. Alderman, after he got arrested, did what many criminals do and I'm sure it's just a coincidence, he found God. He became a religious man, big time. He also became quite the folk hero. He would come into court wearing an all-white suit with a red rose in the lapel. Man, I can't make that up. He had groupies, women who would sit in the back row of Miami Federal Court. We love you. And of course, they swooned when the jury convicted him of murder. Now, there was a problem. And the problem was, who's going to hang him? A lot of people don't remember that it was in the 1930s that the state of Florida concentrated all their executions on the big state prison complex up there, Rayford and Stark and around there, and that's when they created the electric chair. Before that, each county was responsible for its own hangings. If you go down to the Dade County Courthouse, my brother was a lawyer who goes down there all the time, the old civil courthouse. He was able to tell me which one was the old Sally Port. I think it was the northwest corner. And that's where they had a scaffold. And that's how they would conduct their executions. So the federal government, which had convicted the guy on federal charges, said to the Broward County authorities, we don't have a gallows. You guys do, so would you please hang him? And the Broward County authorities said, we do not want to hang the Gulfstream pirate. Why? Because the guy's a folk hero. Broward County's like, we don't need the headache. Hang a hero? What are you, crazy? We don't want to hang him if we don't have to. So what are we going to do? They were going back and forth, back and forth. Finally, the judge found a passage, an obscure passage in the old maritime laws that said a guy who commits piracy and murder on the high seas is to be hung by the yardarm at the nearest port of call from where the murder took place. Well, the nearest port of call would have been that Fort Lauderdale Coast Guard station from which those Coast Guardsmen left on their ill-fated voyage. So the federal government held their nose, Coast Guard built a scaffold, and they were going to hang him. Here he is with his family the night before his hanging. See, oh, he's so beatific. Oh, I found God. Well, here he is, he's reading his Bible. And he did one thing interesting. The night before his death, he wrote a letter to be given to the Miami Herald. And here's what he wrote. Go ahead. The money I made never did us any good. You can see what it has done. Broken-hearted family. Now, was he playing us? Was he maybe working his odds in the afterlife, hoping that this would be some kind of final thing that would put him over, that would compensate for all of his murders? Was he just crazy? Nobody knows. The next morning, go back. He was hanged. When you hang a guy, put the rope around his neck, there's a trap door, you pull the trigger of the snap cord, and the neck snaps, and they're killed instantly. Except the Gulfstream pirate was not killed instantly. These guys had built a bad scaffold. James Horace Alderman wriggled and squirmed and gurgled and choked for 7 minutes. Yeah, I don't think I'd ever unremember that. So finally, he was declared dead. The Miami Herald's chief police reporter had tried to sneak in to view the hanging, but they recognized him, so he couldn't do it. But he had sent the assistant features editor to go in, posing as the Undertaker. That guy got to see the hanging. The problem is, after the Coast Guard found out, they pressured the Herald to spike the story, which my editors would not have done. They just said, tough doo-doo. But the Herald spiked the story. Go ahead. 25 years later, the guy who had posed as the Undertaker told about the hanging. So, that was the end of the Gulfstream pirate. But I've got one more brutal murder to tell you about. We talked about the Ashley, we talked about the one in Lauderdale. This one was up in West Palm Beach. Go ahead. This man's name is Robert Knox Moncure. He was a federal prohibition agent. After prohibition was passed, the federal government created a special agency just to enforce prohibition. Now, if anyone was unpopular, it was these guys. So in researching the anniversary of the end of Prohibition, I think it was the 75th anniversary, I came across this incident that happened, ironically, in a building that now is 3 blocks north of where the Palm Beach Post building stands. So basically 3 blocks north of where I was sitting at the time. Moncure and another agent, Frank Patterson, had gone to the house with a search warrant and an arrest warrant to arrest a guy named George Moore. George Moore was a very well-known rum runner. He had been busted many times, but he kept getting off on technicalities. So they showed up at the house with the search warrant, and they knocked on the door, and George Moore shotgunned Robert Knox Moncure right through the door and killed him. Turned around, saw Patterson trying to come in the back door, killed him. Go ahead. That's his wife, Liza Moncure. I'll tell you about her in a second. Go ahead. This is back when newspapers had art departments. It was wonderful. We got to, he came in here, he came in here. It was wonderful. George Moore was acquitted because his lawyers argued that the search warrant was for daytime only. And according to that day's newspaper, official sunset had been 15 minutes earlier. So George argued that when he saw people knocking on his door, he didn't know that they were agents. He thought it was a home invasion, and so he shot to defend his life. The jury, again, George Moore is one of those kind of an anti-hero, so the jury acquitted him in short time. Many years later, he was convicted in the other guy's murder. He died in obscurity. I found his obit. It's about a paragraph long. It says he was a house painter. Moncure is buried in Arlington because he'd been a World War I veteran. Now, when I discovered this, I said, holy cow, I got to write a big story about this. This is a great story. So this is around 2000, and this is back when reporters weren't allowed to touch this thing called the internet. So I had to call our librarian, once again, libraries, and I said, Sammy, it's a she. I said, Sammy, I'll never find the family of George Patterson. There's 10 million Pattersons in America. But I might get lucky with Robert Knox Moncure. I did the math, and just maybe, there's a Robert Knox Moncure III somewhere in America. Can you do your magic with this new internet thing? She calls me back 10 minutes later. She says, did you look in the Boca Raton phone book? Because if I had, I would have found insurance agent Robert Knox Moncure III. So I called him up. He said, yep, that's my grandfather. And then he said the thing that makes historians and reporters' knees buckle. He said, I have a box of stuff under the bed. You're literally, what was the most cool stuff in the bed? It was letters that Liza Moncure had written to her husband after he was dead. Not creepy, heartbreaking. I read these letters. How can I live without you? I saw a man come around the corner. I thought it was you, and then I realized it wasn't. You're never coming back. Just heart-wrenching. And so what those letters did was take what already was a great, compelling crime story and a great historical story about how the good guys became the bad guys and the bad guys became the good guys, and a story about how Prohibition wasn't a victimless crime. I already had all those things. But now all of a sudden I had a love story. And I called my features editor and I started reading the letters. She said, you're done. You had me at the first sentence. How can I go on living? And it was just a great story. And the death of Robert Knox Moncure is the opening scene of Hypocrite's Row. Because every person, place, character, storyline in Hypocrite's Row is based on or inspired by real people, real things that happen. I'm the only guy in the world that writes a novel and puts a bibliography in the back. Because I didn't want people to think that I just took all these great stories and just pasted them in and called them my own. I said, you know, this guy is based on John Ashley. This guy is based on the Gulf Stream Pirates. This guy is based on the Robert Montour shootout. And when I wrote that story, that's when I knew that there was a book there. So, Prohibition ends, 1933. Wait a minute. Did it automatically end in Florida? Nope. Florida waited almost a year before they finally did it. And finally, November 34, dry laws are repealed. So here's the great news. Now everybody in South Florida could have their drink. But most people couldn't afford it. You with me? Because while Prohibition was dying down here in South Florida, what did we have? Yeah, 26. Yeah, the 28. That's the one I wrote the book about up in Lake Okeechobee. Around 3,000 people. Yeah, the great Labor Day hurricane. And now we are deep, deep, deep in the, you better believe it. And of course, we know the rest of the story because you heard my talk last year on World War II in Florida. That's what got Florida out of the Depression. But think about how bipolar, and I know that's a medical term, I don't mean to be disrespectful, but South Florida was in the 20s. High, low, high, low, high, low. In the 20s, everybody could drink all they want. The gangsters were living high. They were buying and selling property faster than it could work its way down the sidewalk. And then everything crashed. And that's the story of South Florida, isn't it? We almost don't do anything like this. We do everything like this. So I hope I've taught you a little bit about what happened here and why I knew that I had to write a book and had to explain to people what an amazing, often for all the wrong reasons, time this was in South Florida and how everything got muddied. And that's what Nate deals with, especially when he comes to this one hallway, which anybody here familiar with a guy named Fatty Walsh? Fatty Walsh was a gangster who got shot and killed playing cards in a secret card room on the top floor of Biltmore. Thank you, who said it? Biltmore. So what I did was, I moved Fatty, renamed Fatty Walsh, made him a Puerto Rican rumrunner. He was a Miami guy, but I had him shot and killed up in Palm Beach at a secret room up there called Hypocrite's Row. So, I'm done. So that's my story, and I should tell you that I'm not allowed to sell books here because of the library's rules, but I might have left some in my car. I don't know. Maybe. Go ahead, one more. We have time for questions or comments. Yes, ma'am.
Could you go back to the group shot that you did when they said Prohibition was over in 1934, I think it was?
This one?
That.
Yeah.
Where was that?
I cannot tell a lie. It's not in Florida.
It could have been anywhere.
Yeah, I just went with a generic picture there. But I guarantee, well, because for one thing, on December 5th, 1933, that wasn't possible in Florida. Because they hadn't passed, they hadn't cleared it locally yet. But that's where it was in other parts of the country. In other parts of the country, it was automatic. So, but it's a great picture. So, other questions or comments? Hey, Bob. Yeah.
Interestingly, the Biltmore just recently built a speakeasy up in the second floor in the what was the servants area, and it's named after Al Capone's designation in Alcatraz. I think it's AK 84 or something. Whatever it was, a simple little 2 letters and 2 numbers.
Yeah, go back and
goes around, comes around.
Go back and watch The Untouchables and see how wild that was. See how much corruption, how many cops were on the take and stuff like that. We had, right? We beat the heck out of The Untouchables. Other questions or comments? Anything else I left out? Well, thank you for. Oh, one more.
I tunnel and found in Miami. And that was, of course, she was very much a drive, and wanted to keep the city of Miami liquor free, except Flagler, who was not a big drinker himself. However, he insisted on being allowed to sell liquor at the Royal Palm during tourist season. And all of those who wanted liquor stores and went to north of the city limits. And of course, North Miami became known as real.
I can imagine, yeah, they played a lot of games with that, and I think Flagler's moral life dealt mostly with pieces of green paper, whatever that was what was most important for him. He didn't want to drink, but he certainly didn't mind taking people's money to drink. So.
And what was interesting too is knowing that Julia was such a moral person with opposing liquor and gambling. And her son, after her death in 1898, soon sold her house in Fort Dallas, right on the river, and what became the Seminole casino, where they had gambling and I always thought traffic was turning over.
Okay, last call. Well, thank you for coming. Appreciate it. Thanks, Andre.